Hi, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thanks for joining me for this IPA talk. Today's date for this recording is March 8th, and it's a real pleasure for me to have a return guest for IPA talk here, Dr. Mark Klaisner, who is the Regional Superintendent at West 40. He's also the President of the Regional Superintendent of Schools Association here for the state of Illinois, IARSS. And Mark, good to see you. Glad to see that you are well. Sure appreciate you jumping in with me. And of course, the last time we did this, you were with me at the IPA office, and we were able to be together. We're trying to do the responsible thing now and do the social distance stuff. And thank goodness for this great technology and Zoom. But thanks again for being with me. And how are you?
I'm well, Jason. Thank you for inviting me. I always look forward to our conversations. This way we can document it for all time, right? As we think back to the 2020 spring, this is what life looked like. But we're well, and I think kind of setting the tone for our discussion, I'm really trying to grasp onto the notion of hope and looking forward. I'm sure you're having the conversations too. What's next year going to look like? What's the summer going to look like? What are we going to do with this stimulus money? There are some exciting things to talk about looking forward, and we're finding ourselves pretty hopeful. So that's exciting.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I recorded an IPA talk with the 2020 principals of the year for last year. And during the spring of last year, I met with each of them individually, and we recorded one of these and shared those out. And those were fascinating conversations. And I felt like it was important to bring them back together and do it with them together. So, as you get school leaders together, there's some real energy there that transpires even online like this. And of course, wanted their reflections from this last year, but most importantly, as they start thinking about leading forward, and everybody, I think, recognizes summertime gets here. We definitely need to recharge, give people a little bit of time to breathe, get some space. But, I think as leaders should do, we are providers of hope, as you referenced, which is critical, which I think there's a lot to be hopeful for when we think about moving forward. And there are some things I think definitely to get excited about, because as I talked with that group, what became apparent through that conversation was just, this has been one of the more exciting times of innovation in our field, just out of necessity, of course. But I think we're going to see about what we really are capable of doing in this business. And I hope two things. One, that we take the things that we've learned that work well for kids and are able to move those forward. But I also hope we don't lose that sense of resilience and innovation in the field too, that we keep that spirit up as a result of this time as well. So I don't know, while this is extremely hard and it's been terrible for the country in terms of just real health of people and the economic hardship and the trauma that comes with it. But, I do think there are some things that we can pull from it and hopefully be good for us.
And Jason, I don't think it'll surprise you that in the regional offices, we're having similar conversations. Last March and April, in the regional offices, we do a lot of calendar work. And you remember last March, there were remote learning days and act of God days and so forth. And we frequently said, in January of 2020, we were trying to figure out how to do an e-learning day for one day in a snowstorm. And now we've been remote for a whole year. And I agree. The other thing we've been saying is we don't want to go back to normal if normal was what it was. We've learned some things. We know that the spotlight of the pandemic has shown on all kinds of inequities across the state and across the nation, and we need to come back better. And I'm loving words like renewal or rejuvenating. As we come back, we need to come back better. And, for our topic about the teacher shortage, when you talk about innovation, one of the things we'll talk about perhaps is that innovation has also caused some layers of stress and some layers of difficulty because it was new to so many people. But I agree, we've got to find those silver linings. We've got to look forward, and we need to celebrate the successes of our hardworking educators and bring those into the future. What did we learn, and how can we be better?
Yeah, agreed. Well, because we do have limited time here, Mark, and of course, I could talk with you on these issues for quite a while, amongst other things. But in your role as president of IRSS, one of the things that your organization has done just an outstanding job with is really making sure that we keep a spotlight on the challenges that we've got with the educator pipeline. And for several years now, you have surveyed superintendents across the state, just asking for their perceptions about, what are they seeing with hiring of teachers and other positions. And in this one, you spent some time talking about administration as well as substitutes and all of that. So you've really worked to kind of make things comprehensive here, which I sure appreciate. But you've done this for a bit now. And so just, want to first off bat it to you and just, share out your general overall impressions here with the survey this time, what you did maybe even different than what you've done in the past and what the results are showing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jason. I'll toot our own horn a little bit. We're pretty proud of this work for a couple reasons. When we do our survey each year, our response rate is typically around 75% of the superintendents in the state respond to our survey.
A lot of doctoral students would love that response rate, right?
Exactly.
That's outstanding.
Yep. You think the rule of thumb tends to be like, you'd like to see 30, but we're getting 75. Mm-hmm. And this year, a couple things happened. It dipped a little bit down to just about 70% response rate, which is still pretty amazing. But we also received a fair number of responses that said, with all that's going on, I just don't have time to fit that in. Please keep up the good work and I'll respond next year. So the other thing is that if listeners are interested and they get a chance to drill down into some of the data, those 70% were from all over the state. And so we feel like what we offer to your organization or others, perhaps to the legislature, to ISB, is that we have a pretty good view of what's happening and the perceptions all over the state from the boots on the ground folks. Sadly, we were not surprised by the results. They've been pretty consistent. And, what we found was 77% of our educators said that they have a teacher shortage problem. You think about that, three quarters of the schools in the state are struggling finding teachers. And 93%, Jason, 93% said they're having trouble finding substitutes. We know, and I know you see this data too, across the state in terms of educators, the numbers are like 4,500 unfilled positions. Yeah. And we were able to document things like classes that were canceled or classes that had to be moved online. So we weren't surprised by the data. We were disappointed that it didn't get too much better. We see inklings of hope for the future. We understand that enrollments are up a little bit in education programs across our state. We understand that that our superintendents are reporting a few less vacancies. It's not a huge amount, but it feels like a couple things are headed in the right direction. And if you want, we can talk about one of the things that we did this year is we asked superintendents to respond about the impact of the COVID pandemic and what impact that had on our teacher shortage crisis in the state of Illinois. That was probably the newest dimension to our survey work this year.
So what do they have to say then about that, Mark?
So a couple things, a couple to us as educational leaders, a couple are intuitive. If you're really going to physically distance kids and put more space between kids, then you need more rooms, which means you need more adults. Educators were very creative in finding ways to cluster kids when it was appropriate, but still keeping physical distances and numbers and safety first. But still, any of those dimensions required more adults. Another example that came up very quickly was, what do you do with buses? You can't put 3 kids in a seat and physically distance, but you can't afford 3 times as many buses. So how does that all play out? So we heard from superintendents loud and clear that there was a need for more adults. And as I mentioned, the 93% that couldn't find substitutes, many of our substitutes tend to be retired teachers who love kids and love teaching. And that age group was more at jeopardy and wasn't all that anxious to come back to congregate settings. And if they were doing remote work as substitutes, that required a fair amount of sophistication, new software, new ways to deliver curriculum virtually or through video conferencing, things like that. So a lot of complications that came, not just learning about PPE and not just learning about disinfecting and masks and gloves and all those pieces, but also how to manage people well and keep everybody, students, families, staff members, how to keep everybody safe. So it only made the situation worse as we tried to figure out how to navigate through the pandemic.
So what I found interesting, Mark, and you and I were just briefly discussing this prior to me hitting the record button here, was that, when you look at and again, this is a perception survey, of course, but when you look at the perceptions of superintendents this year compared to last year, it felt like there was that the concerns related to the shortage, while still vast, they seem to tick down a little bit compared to the results from last year, which I found really fascinating, considering the fact that we were in a pandemic and such. So and I know you guys are still digging through the data. You've got other reports and things yet to come. People can sure look at this information themselves, but any hypothesis for why you feel like that might be, especially when you look at the trend currently of unfilled positions, which is, not over the last few years, maybe not been vastly difference one year to the next, but it still seems to have gone up a little bit when we look at the positions that are out there. So I was just kind of curious if you had a thought about that.
Well, Jason, I think you know our organization, and like yours, we don't ever shine light on a problem without trying to find solutions. Mm-hmm. And as you or listeners choose to look at our report or drill down in the data, there is some hope. And some of the things that we're looking at, both short-term and long-term, it wouldn't surprise me that our superintendents are feeling a little bit more hopeful. This year, as you mentioned earlier, has been a problem-solving kind of year. We've stepped up and found innovative ways to address situations and use technology. But in our policy recommendations, we talk about adapting a new normal. And what is that going to look like? And the fact that we found ways to deliver coursework remotely, our study showed over 200 classes were moved to an online format. That's an interesting innovation moving forward, to start saying, like, well, how can we offer more things to students, perhaps with less individuals, if we're able to use a new normal, a new system of remote learning.
Well, and along those lines, Mark, I just offer up, just as a thought here that comes to mind, you talked about schedules and calendars, and that's something that regional superintendents have to work through a lot and deal with those in close collaboration with school districts. But we may have a lot of opportunity to be creative with how we just deal with time, right? Yep. And with flexibility, I think there could be some attractiveness for K-12 education for people if they recognize that the field is able to flex and be innovative for the way that we deliver education to our kids. So that could be an interesting thought.
Absolutely. And, I'm sure you have a million examples too. A simple example was when our administrators said, well, it's difficult to figure out how to do lunch. So what if we do an A-B schedule? And if we do some in the morning and some in the afternoon, but we don't serve lunch? And there are just a myriad of examples of ways that people were looking at to creatively address the needs of students in a variety of ways. Scheduling, absolutely, you're right on target. Actually, this afternoon, I'm working with a group from ISB, and we're going to start talking about next year's calendar.
Mm-hmm.
What does next year's calendar look like? And we use different codes for different kinds of days, remote learning and remote learning planning days and acts of God. And so we're working with the ISB calendar team and see how the regional offices can help. I think before we actually went on live here, you and I were talking a bit about there are a couple bills that are sitting in the legislature right now asking about the length of the school day, the length of the school year. We need to come away from this whole experience with some learnings that can make us be better, and not the least of which is the possibilities of a remote environment and or scheduling. I've heard people say, is this the time to talk about year-round schooling? I think anything's on the table, and we should learn from what we've experienced and make things better.
Yeah. Well, and obviously when we start getting into those conversations, we got to be working very closely with communities with regards to that, to help bring those things to bear, because obviously the consumers that we serve have some definite opinions about that. Yep. But, with that being said, while we are very concerned about learning loss, that concept, or some of the SEL related issues that we've got to contend with kids, we've had some students that have actually been quite successful in this environment. And, I'll just be real open and transparent here, Mark. When I think about my own 5 children, I've got one that he's still is in intermediate school now. He's done quite well in that sometimes those social interactions for him are not as easy. And so not having, while he makes friends easily, likes being with other kids, just not having the constant pressure of dealing with large numbers of other students and things, and what, just being kind of the introverted self that he is, there's been some comfort in being able to do the work in the way that he has. Now, we definitely obviously want him to be in school as much as possible, but it's like starting to think about where are blended opportunities and ways that, you say the term new normal, and I like that, because I think we have to look at how we're going to approach things in different ways moving forward. One thing I did want to mention, Mark, when looking at the survey results and then hearing about the good press that you guys have had with regards to the reports and things, and I say part of this just because it impacted where I'm from is, you looked at well, let me just say this: the teacher shortage does not affect the state equally, right? Yep. As you look at the northeast part of the state, it's probably not quite as bad because you have your, more dense population centers. Even come down the 55 corridor, Wilmington Normal or Springfield or whatever, into the Metro East area may not be as bad because of having more people. But then, the results showed, at least the perceptions of the superintendents in West Central Illinois, which is where I'm from. I'm a Pike County kid, went to school in Griggsville, where I graduated from. My dad was my principal for 10 years of my life there, all of that stuff. And so the perceptions out of that part of the state showed that it's a little more difficult, that they're having a harder time of attracting people And so I think one of the complexities here moving forward in terms of how we deal with policy and make things work is, how do we add capacity to that part of the state, for example, or other parts of the state, and obviously probably many of the rural parts of the states that don't have as many bodies of people to draw from.
So this is a great question, and I'm really blessed to be able to serve as the president across the state. So in some ways, you and I get to share those lenses from every corner of the state. And this conversation has taken two branches, Jason. One is in the northeast corner of the state, not only is there population density, but there's also real estate wealth. And because our state is overly dependent on real estate taxes, it's just a matter of fact that the northeast corner has higher teacher salaries. In this day and age, that draws some of the talent to that northeast corner. And I do believe, you and I have had this conversation for years. I'm a strong believer in EBF. If it's funded appropriately and we're moving toward adequacy for everybody, that factor could lessen greatly. But I think the other thing I've heard, and I love that your father was your principal. That's a cool thing.
Well, we made it through. It was okay a lot of days, not always. I've got some stories, but anyway, I digress.
Well, I think, in some of our rural communities, what people are telling me is, they'll say, hey, Mark, if we lose 2 math teachers, that might be half of the math department. It might be
the whole math department, Mark.
It might be the whole math department. Exactly right, Jason. And then up in the northeast corner, where you've got high schools of 4,000 students, the math department might be 20, 30 people.
Yeah.
And we found that up in the northeast corner, with large schools and large staffs, sometimes districts were paying stipends for teachers to teach during their planning periods.
Yeah.
They were able to cover those, whereas in a rural community, they're like, shoot, I just lost my whole math department. And so it's numbers, and it's also like percentages and magnitude. And so the conversations we've heard across the state about this notion is in fact, it's really hit our rural communities really hard. And I think part of that solution is going to be in better funding for education. I think it's going to be making the profession more attractive. Some people, young people choosing to go into the teaching profession, or people who are second career people who have content expertise that might want to shift over. I think all those are part of the solution, or could be. But we have to keep a really keen eye on our colleagues in rural settings, because I think that, I'm being told by our data that they're hit more profoundly than some of our metro areas.
Yeah, well, and almost not maybe exactly the same, but it feels a little similar. In terms of how do we attract people to the profession and be available to work in these parts of the state. But then, when you think about where we also have gaps in our teacher educator core, I mean, it's just not with teachers, but just educators across the board, is with our educators of color, right? Our Black, Latinx, and others. We know we have some pretty significant disparities there between the numbers of those individuals that are in classrooms or in school leadership positions, and then the numbers of kids that we have in the classrooms and things as well. And what's interesting, we've done a little bit of work around this and looked at this for school leadership. And while the numbers of Black leaders versus Black students there's not as much disparity there for that instance versus the Latinx, there's a huge disparity. But I would entertain, Mark, if you pull Chicago out of the mix, the disparity becomes large for both populations of Black leaders and versus Black students, and Latinx leaders versus Latinx students. And so, that's similarly to me, even with those that are interested in rural positions. Obviously, we've got some real work there that needs to be done. I know, the Omnibus bill that was passed here over that the Black Caucus put together, and there's some work that's going to be done related to this. But obviously that's an issue, and I know it's something that you guys are looking at as well.
Yep, and I'm glad you brought up the Omnibus bill. That there are a few things that were woven into that bill that are helpful. Things like tuition assistance for minority groups. Recruiting early on. I think the work, I'd like to see us capitalize on some of the work that's been done in the fall, particularly with IFT and IEA around mentoring new teachers.
Mm-hmm.
In the discussions that the ROEs are having with ISB or Advance Illinois, some of the pipeline work, there's always this secondary question about how do we build in retention? Because we also see, if we look at our teachers of color, they tend to exit the profession more quickly.
Yep.
And so why is that? And how can we support that? I'd like to think that the fact that we've broken down the mileage problems, right? That perhaps we can support. If our whole world is doing teletherapy, why can't we have professional communities of practice and do that remotely,
right? And
support all of our teachers, but particularly ones who share common interests, whether that's curriculum or whether that's ethnicity, any number of things. Why not use some of those things that you and I were talking about that we've learned and support our folks? So both in retention and in recruiting. Jason, I'm really hopeful that next year's study will actually include some focus groups of high school students. I would love for us, the ROEs are in 38 offices all over the state. I would love for us to sit down with sophomores and juniors and say, how many of you want to be teachers? Why or why not? And hear right from the front end of the pipeline, what would incentivize the bright young people to take on teaching as a profession, and really address it at that level rather than sort of after the fact. We would love, as regional offices, we would love to be part of that discussion.
Yeah.
Recruiting and mentoring and internships and apprenticeships. What does all that look like?
Yeah.
And I think that also addresses not just the shortage, but can easily be translated into discussions about recruiting minority candidates or teachers of color to enter our profession. I've had an amazing career, and I wouldn't have changed a thing. And I would love to have others experience that kind of excitement throughout a career of changing the lives of young people.
That's a brilliant strategy, by the way, I think, to get in there and actually talk to those kids. Having a couple of those teenagers under my own roof right now, they got a lot to say.
Yep.
One more than the other, but they got a lot on their mind. Well, there's a lot we could still be unpacking here, Mark, but I want to just wrap us up. But I do want to give an opportunity just to share out, if people are looking to dig into the data, you put together a really nice website, nice tool that gives folks really an opportunity to dig in pretty deep. So where can folks go find that?
Thanks for that, Jason. Yeah, our website is IARSS.org. So Illinois Association of Regional Superintendents of Schools.org. And there's a flash banner on the front page. When you go to the site, it's right there. You click, you can get to the shortage. This year, we expanded our deliveries or our deliverables. We have a portal that's free to anybody that wants, and it allows you to drill down on a number of different maps of Illinois. There are 8 different pages. And so you can drill down right to your county, depending on the specific questions you're asking. So the portal is terrific. It's interactive. There's a little tutorial if you want to learn more about it. Secondly, we have the study itself. It's there. You can print it out as a PDF if you want, or you can read through it on the webpage. It's very, very well done and includes policy recommendations as well as a look into the data. This year, we're adding 4 white papers, and we've been working with our partners at Goshen Consulting and ISU and taking a deeper dive into these 4 white papers. We've published one. The second is about to go on the website. Eventually, there'll be 4 in all. And then there's just a summary piece about sort of our talking points. If you just want quick overall bullet points, we've got that to offer too. So IARSS.org is the best place to go to get some more information about our study.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Mark Klaisner, thanks for joining me again. Mark is the now are you executive director at West 40, Mark? That's your official title there, but also president of IRSS. So thanks for being with me. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason. Always enjoy our conversations.
You bet. And hopefully next on the back end of this thing, we can do this together in person sometime. So
that would be great.
You bet.
That'd be great.
Again, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thanks for joining us for this IPA talk. As always, if there's anything the association can do for you, don't hesitate to give us a call or check us out on the web at www.ilprincipals.org. Take care.